Hello, hello. You're listening to The Long Game. I'm your host, David Lee Kim, co-founder of Omniscient Digital, and in this episode, we chat with Joe Lee, VP of Growth Marketing at Ontra. Previously, Joe led growth and demand generation at People.ai and Checker, where he built the operations and teams needed to scale revenue to achieve unicorn status. He's spent over 15 years helping organizations of all stages implement the processes, technologies, and people needed to drive targeted, automated, and exponential growth. In this conversation, we go deep into account-based marketing, or ABM. Now, ABM is often a nebulous phrase or word that people often describe differently. They toss it around in conversations, but for the longest time, I didn't really know what account-based marketing looked like or what it was. It seemed like just a list of tactics. In this conversation, Joe shares what a true ABM orchestration looks like and some examples of campaigns that he has run. We also get into the backstory of how he developed as a marketing leader and his hot take on the future of the CMO role. Without further ado, here's my conversation with Joe Lee. All right, Joe, how's it going? It's so great to have you on The Long Game. Thanks so much for making the time.
Yeah, it's going well, and I'm really excited to be here.
Sweet. So let's jump straight into it. You're currently VP of Growth Marketing Ontra, and we met, I guess, about a year ago from working together at People.ai, and I like to think we became good friends after one of our business trips out to New York. So what reminded me of our conversation was you're the first person to actually explain what account-based marketing was to me. It's always been a very vague thing to myself and peers. So we'll talk about that later. So before we get to that, you told me this story about how you got into tech. I think it's a really fun story about how you moved from San Diego. So maybe we can start there. Tell me about that story of where you were before you got into tech and how you made that transition.
Yeah, I'm guessing what you're referencing is I started my career post college thinking I wanted to be a pastor. So I was a college pastor for 4 years, and I have what they call a master's of divinity. I don't know how you masters the divine, but that's what I was studying. And you know, in that process, I kind of stumbled into marketing. I was working for a nonprofit micro lender in San Diego, paying my way through seminary, and through all that, I realized, you know, I don't think I want to do this anymore. So I graduate from my master's program. My mom's like, "So what? Are you going to get a church job now?" And I told her, "No, I think I'm going to move to San Francisco and live in a hacker house and try to get into tech." I think she completely thought I'd lost my mind. But that's what I did. I literally packed all my possessions at 29 into 2 SUVs. I sold the house that I bought in San Diego. I moved up to San Francisco, lived in a 1-bedroom hacker house, or like a 1-bedroom in a hacker house. It was the size of a walk-in closet with like 18 other, mostly men. And I just tried to break into tech. It was 4 to 5 months of full-time grinding, watching my net worth, you know, fall in the tens of thousands under zero, and I got my first startup gig. So that's what did that all started.
Yeah, what did that time look like? So you're living in this hacker house, which I had not heard of before, but I can imagine what it looks like. But what were you doing in that time to like try to break into tech?
Yeah. At that time, there was, you know, this was 7-8 years ago now. So boot camps were having its heyday. Not only developer boot camps, but also boot camps for marketers, or at that time we were calling them growth hackers. Boot camps for growth hackers, and boot camp for product management and design, UX design, and all, you know, sales. And so I was doing a growth hacker boot camp, and that was 3 months. 60 hours a week, you know, and yeah, there was some classes, but really, I think what the boot camp provided me was, you know, the network, the friends, right? Just to, you know, I mean, a lot of these folks became my best friends. It was like almost like a concentrated MBA experience, I think about. And then I think the most important thing, the excuse to just focus on my career for 3 months, right? Because I went and told my parents, I'm doing this boot camp. They like guarantee I'm going to get a job. Like my parents, while they thought I was crazy, they still understood the concept of school and career development. And it was the excuse basically to really commit myself full time to trying to get into tech. And that's really what I think I got out of it. On the Hacker House side, I mean, literally, I think it was 18 people living in this house. I think 16 of us were guys sharing what was functionally 2 bathrooms. So you can imagine what that experience was like. But I mean, I think back to those 4 or 5 months, and as stressful and uncertain as my life was at that time, it really served as just an amazing foundation to being in San Francisco. Some of the most fun I'd ever had in my life. And actually, it was right around 2015. So it was kind of the heyday, not only of boot camps, but of Web 2.0. I mean, there was a new app being released every single week. I mean, I mean, there were like people passing out flyers on Market, just promoting the new app. And so being in that kind of educational environment, while there was 2 or 3 apps being released every week. I mean, I remember at one point, my phone probably had 200 apps that we were just testing and trying to understand. And it was, I was really fortunate. People ask me nowadays, do I recommend them coming and doing this? And I'm like, I don't know. Like it worked for me, but I think it was partly also just a result of the time, right? That I got so much success out of it. I think things have changed a little bit in terms of, kind of the whole boot camp arena nowadays.
Yeah, it sounds like you definitely burned the boats with the move up to San Francisco. Much more risk than I would personally take, but it worked out for you. And you say it was like a condensed MBA, but probably cheaper than an MBA and took less time. So it seemed to have many pros.
Probably about half the price of a semester of an MBA, I would say.
Yeah. Sounds like a great deal. So now you're at Ontra as VP of Growth Marketing. Tell us about, you broke into tech and now you're at Ontra. What was that journey like?
Yeah. So, one of the things I really actually disagreed with the boot camp on, they had career coaching, and it was this very millennial, fake it till you make it, shoot for your dream company and go get it, right? Do the networking. If you want to work for Uber, if you want to work for Airbnb, go find an executive there and just like force your way in, was kind of the mantra. And I just didn't believe them, right? Like my teacher at the boot camp called me the persistent skeptic as a negative thing. And I actually saw that as a good thing, right? Because I just didn't drink that part of the Kool-Aid. So for me, early in my tech career, I optimized for experience and title over sexiness of the company. And so I got in as a demand gen manager it was a startup called NetPulse. Really interesting background. Like it was founded probably 10 years before by like one of the co-founders of Intuit. And their core product was selling TV screens on treadmills. So it was health tech. And and it was a hardware company. And all of a sudden, all the OEMs, all the manufacturers of these treadmills, they started to bring all that in-house. So NetPulse had to quickly pivot. And so they pivoted from this OEM hardware-focused company selling the 5 accounts to mobile apps for gyms. So it opened up the entire gym market. And we were basically selling white labeled mobile apps for gyms, which if you are a gym member now is pretty de facto technology for your gym experience. We really, I think, paved the way for that. And I joined right at that pivot. And it was an exciting time. I mean, I learned inbound marketing. We were a big HubSpot shop. So, that was, I think, my first foray into marketing technology. And, because the gym market is mostly a SMB play, lead gen, content, email nurtures. I mean, all that played such a big role into that. And then we grew quickly. Right? within a year, I basically rode the net pulse wave from 50 employees up to about 130, and then unfortunately back down to about 60 when I decided, all right, this isn't going anywhere. But in that time, I joined. So basically, I guess what I'm trying to say, I joined a company on no one's radar because it had been a hardware company for 10 years and was pivoting. And I joined for the experience because it was probably a higher title than I could get at a more sexy company. And I joined at a time when I got to do a lot of things. So by the time I left NetPulse, I was running marketing, I was running implementation, I was running biz ops or rev ops, we call it now. And believe it or not, I was the head of people. So my least favorite part of that job was my weekly meeting with our office manager, where I had to field snack complaints. Because I had a seat at the table from a leadership point of view, I got to ride that wave of hyper growth. We ran out of TAM, basically. Like when we ran out of TAM, we basically realized we 6 of the top 10 largest enterprises were already on our platform, and there was not much more to go. And so we quickly started to shrink after that. And so when I left, I had a lot of experience in a 2-year time. What that afforded me the opportunity to do was then I actually looked for like a higher, like either director, and I actually landed a associate vice president position at a company called Sutherland. If you haven't heard of it, makes sense to me. I hadn't either. Sutherland was a 30-year-old BPO, business processing outsourcing company, billion-dollar revenue, 60,000 employees across the world. And they were basically looking for a young tech startup guy to build out their digital engine. And so I was like the youngest executive in the room, probably by at least 20 years. And I really believe I got the job because who in their right mind would pick, to work for a company like that in tech, right? And I did, because I optimized for experience, I optimized for title. I knew that was the quickest way for me to accelerate my career, and was there for another 2 years. I think the thing that I learned at Sutherland really, interestingly is the politics. How do you work with older execs? How do you who've been doing the same thing for the last 20 years? How do you get your ideas through? How do you run pilots? And deck building was a skill I learned there. I built a lot of decks there. And some listeners might hear that and go like, man, that sounds terrible. But those are literally some of the most valuable skills I learned as a leader at this company, which was terrible, but very valuable. So
yeah, we've talked about that before, and I know folks will complain about the office politics and all of that, but it's actually a very valuable skill once you start going to larger companies where it's almost a feature, not a bug, where you kind of need that in order to maintain the process and everything within a company. So yeah, it's great that you got to get that experience. I wanted to ask about, you were saying you optimized for title and experience, not the sexiness of the company. Where did you learn that? Was that just a hypothesis you had yourself, or was there some teacher mentor who was like, hey, Joe, forget the sexy companies, optimize for this instead?
I think part of it, when, going back to the boot camp, I was a little bit more mid-career than a lot of folks, right? I was 29 when I did the boot camp. So it was a true career pivot for me. So I think it was, and I am a millennial, but I'm probably borderline, young millennial, right? So I think part of it was life experience. The other part was I think I fundamentally rejected this notion that I'm special and that the world needs to keel over to me or whatever. So I can't say it was a specific person that kind of taught me that, but it was just more the older I got, I just became a little bit more of a realist than my peer set at the time.
Yeah, maybe the Masters of Divinity taught you some wisdom.
Hopefully.
All right, so maybe I'll fast forward a little bit. We had met at People AI, where you were also VP of marketing before your current role at Ontra. So what are you focused on now? What are the goals or challenges that you're focused on?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I mean, I'm a VP of growth marketing. So, one thing I specifically picked that title over kind of probably a more traditional title, and traditional meaning maybe what it was called 10 years ago, which was like demand gen, specifically because I think old school demand gen had a very, very defined definition. Typically, the goal of a demand gen leader was to drive MQLs, marketing qualified leads, for the sales team to follow up on. And so much, I think, has changed in the last 10, 15 years. The introduction of account-based marketing, the introduction of product-led growth as a concept, the disruption of this whole era of growth hacking and experimentation and all that. I think seeing the demand gen leader as also owning things like field marketing and events, I think the role has shifted so much. At People AI, I really pushed for the title of growth marketing because it started to feel like it was becoming at least in the tech world, the de facto title for the person who really is just, the person on the marketing team who's really committed to growth in whatever fashion that might be, whether it's users, leads, pipeline, revenue. So I set that up to say, at Ontra now, that's really what I'm focused on. Like I'm the person the leader on the marketing team that anytime, someone has a question, how do we grow from this to this? It kind of falls under my department. So I have a fairly wide remit. I definitely have digital, which, I would consider more traditional demand gen. I have a campaigns team, which is kind of more demand gen ABM, but I also have field and events under me. I have content under me. I'm helping out build out our EMEA APAC presence with, and so it's a fairly wide remit. If we ever went into a more traditional or a more PLG motion, that would kind of be under me as well. So those are kind of the things I'm focused on here.
Yeah. And what would you say are the biggest challenges in your job? Like those are a lot of different things to be doing. So what are difficult parts of it?
Yeah, I think it's fewfold. The biggest challenge that comes to mind right now is hiring. Our team is 3xing this year, and the economy is not slowing us down, which is really exciting. I have a lot of director roles to hire because and so that's been probably the biggest challenge and what I'm focusing the most on. I think the second is education. I think probably I think depending on the org, the most misunderstood parts of marketing can either be kind of the growth demand gen side of the equation or product marketing. So I think a lot of what I feel like I need to do is, hey, when we talk about growth marketing, what are we actually talking about? Why does it matter? Why should we even care about these metrics? So a lot of it has just been doing internal education and educating the team, like why what I do is important. And then I think the third part, which might actually be the number one concern is, am I setting believable metrics? And I think the believable piece is key. Or and what I mean by that is, are we all aligned that these are the metrics that matter? And do we really believe that? And two, am I meeting them? Right? Because that's ultimately what's going to, allow the company to continue to fund my programs and make sure I have a job. So, I think lately those are really what I'm thinking about.
Yeah. Yeah. The way you're positioning your role as the VP of growth marketing is interesting. I think it's interesting to me because I've been enmeshed in this growth marketing thing where, that's kind of where I started. I didn't get much of a taste of the traditional demand gen that you talk about. So when you talk about this internal education of the org, how are you defining or explaining growth marketing to the team? And what are the metrics you're proposing that folks are getting used to?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think the definition is pretty similar to what I just talked about is I'm the leader on the org who's in the marketing team who's thinking about growth, whatever that means to you. I think for most B2B companies, that's revenue, which is, which a KPI of, or a leading indicator of revenue is pipeline or leads. Right. So I think that's one strain of it, right? Where, and that's an education in and of itself. Like, I think everyone on the executive level understands, hey, revenue is a good thing and we want to see this grow, time and time again. I think, but we have to educate, if by the time I realize revenue is down, it's already too late, right? Like that's a key thing. And the way we get ahead of that is we introduce the concept of leading indicators, which is actually something you and I spent a lot of time focused on at People AI. Like, what are all the leading indicator metrics before revenue that we could start looking at to kind of warn us, like the canary in the coal mine that says, oh, if X is down, we should fix this. Otherwise, in 3 months, it's going to hurt revenue. And because marketing typically is more of an early cycle, I mean, marketing in some ways is the canary in the coal mine, right? We're paying attention to some of those leading indicators like leads, marketing qualified leads, MQLs, pipeline, the conversion rates in between those stages. And so there's a lot of education there. So when I report to the executive team, hey, marketing generated 200 leads, the response isn't, oh, well, I can't, bring leads to the bank, which is a response I've actually heard in the market. It's like, oh, wow, that's lower than before. There might be some risk here. Let's really dig in to see what's happening, right? And I think that's kind of the education process. Probably a better indicator, just to drive alignment is pipeline, because most people understand, pipeline solves all pain, right? So it's like, hey, our pipeline is down. That's probably going to impact revenue 3-6 months down to, we should dig in and figure out what's going on here.
Yeah, I think you're talking about something really interesting here. Our audience tends to be, some folks in marketing leadership, some folks who are individual contributors who want to eventually be in those roles. But the thing that you kind of have to learn the hard way sometimes is, as you move up to a leadership role, your job is no longer to do the work. Your job is educating and alignment.
Yep.
And that often means talking to other functional leaders who don't know what you do in your job or what your team does. So it's now your job to explain the importance and how your team functions and how you will work together with that leader. That was something I personally had to learn the hard way. Yep. I couldn't just explain growth or what I was doing. It had to be, oh, here's what growth is first. And let's start there and then figure out how we work together before I tell you about campaigns and experiments, because none of that matters if they're not aligned at a higher level.
Yeah, I joke all the time, like, and I already said this on this podcast. The number one thing I do as a leader here is build decks. And on one hand, it's a joke. On the other hand, it's actually not that far off from the truth. And then one of the things I think people who work for me, they are a little bit startled by is how maniacal I am about decks. Like, formatting. Like I get our creative director to come in and teach my team, like, how do you format, and like titles and all of those things, because, decks, for whatever reason, is the way most companies drive alignment at this point, right? And it's not, I'm not maniacal about it just because I want to produce a pretty artifact, but I'm maniacal about it because if you have the right deck, it becomes the key piece. Like what typically happens for me after 3 to 6 months in a role is I have this master deck. It's typically about 20 to 30 slides. And in almost every one-on-one I have with a cross-functional stakeholder, if they have a question, I'm like, oh, I have a slide for that. Can you give me a second? Let me pull that up in my deck. Like, that's not even a strategic thing I've decided to do. It just sort of happened that way because I realized I needed to build a lot of decks, and it kind of became the key piece for me to drive alignment, cross-functionally within an organization.
Yeah, I have learned to communicate the value of decks. It's not just like something pretty. Like, if done correctly, this will become the source of truth and the way you repeat these strategies that you're doing. It's like we work client facing, we have a pitch deck, similar the way you're talking about is like, that's why pitch decks are so important for startup companies pitching for funding. Like, that's essentially how your idea is going to be interpreted. And if you're not communicating correctly, you're not going to get money, which is in your case, you're not going to get budget.
Yep.
So let's jump into, you had mentioned this earlier, account-based marketing. For such a long time, it felt like a nebulous concept, like a buzzword to me. There was account-based marketing, account-based selling, and I didn't truly understand what it meant until you explained it to me. And then it was just like, oh, that makes sense. But explain to the listeners, how do you view account-based marketing? What is it? And then how do you measure success?
Yeah, I think, I've spent years now thinking about, I was probably first introduced the concept of ABM maybe 5-6 years ago in my career. Since then I've done a lot of thinking on this, right? Like, is it a tactic? Is it a department in an organization? Is it, a channel? Like what is ABM? And I think what I've noticed is, because there isn't a lot of clarity around what it is, people just define it to whatever serves their needs. So, I would say now, I start with what it isn't. It isn't any of those things. It isn't a tactic. It isn't a team. It is an overarching B2B enterprise strategy, right? Like, and it's really, and I qualify that specifically because there was a time when it felt like ABM was like the silver bullet for all marketing, needs. And like, that's crazy, because if you have a B2B or a B2C business model, that requires high volume, like ABM is not going to help you achieve, getting, a lot of new business because of the nature of the beast. So for me, it's a B2B enterprise strategy. And I think the components of those strategy is, I've tended to think about it in 4 groups. I think this has been popularized by a lot of the vendors out there. They talk about flipping the pyramid and all that, but kind of four stages of ABM, or four motions of an ABM strategy. Is you need to think about how you're selecting accounts, right? And this is done with sales and rev ops and really like, ABM starts with account selection. Who are the accounts that we want to focus on? Because the strategy of ABM is we want to focus most of our marketing dollars on those accounts. So selecting the right accounts is the first step. And then it's
all right. Here for folks who aren't familiar, accounts is like just companies. Like what companies are you focused on?
Yep. So where a traditional, what I would call traditional inbound demand gen is, hey, we're going to put a lot of bait out there and see who bites, and then work them through the funnel and to a closed one up deal. ABM is actually flipping that on its head. Is, hey, let's choose 100 of our top accounts to put 80% of our marketing budget towards. Right? It's really different from a demand gen funnel where it's, let's actually focus on our entire TAM and put 80% of our marketing dollars on all 5,000 accounts that could potentially buy from us, and see who kind of makes it to the end. ABM is, let's select 100 accounts or 200 or whatever it is, and let's put 80% of our budget to marketing to those 100 accounts, right? And so it starts where I think demand gen typically starts in content and bait and like awareness channels and all that. ABM starts with account selection. After you've selected your accounts, then it's just contact acquisition, right? And now, whereas I think demand gen is a little bit more, what does the market respond to? I think ABM, you acquire contacts through, the right type. First, you need to define who the right people are. Then you go out to content syndication providers, Zoom Info, like all of these different context sources. You might run ads specific to specific personas in a company so that they fill out the form, right? And so that's getting your database to a place where you can engage. Then I think the third stage is engagement. So now I have the 100 accounts. I have, 15 of the most important people in my database from those accounts, then it's engagement. And I think engagement for ABM is all about sales alignment. I think where demand gen, inbound demand gen is more, I generate an MQL, hand it over to sales. We have an SLA governing our relationship. ABM almost necessitates partnership with sales to go and engage an account. So I'll give you an example of a play, account-based marketing play I really like. We basically created a custom landing page for, let's say the company we're going after was Microsoft. It wasn't, but in this case, let's just pretend it was Microsoft. We ran a bunch of ads to Microsoft, targeting Microsoft, the key personas we were going after, and we drove them all to this custom landing page where they, watched a video, signed up for a direct mail, or consume content. And then we actually had a tool on the back end that we partnered with sales, and we said, all right, we just ran this campaign. Let's look at who actually engaged with our contact and decide, all right, BDRs, are you going after that contact? AEs, are you going after, or are we just dropping them into a marketing nurture? Like that process was much more collaborative because depending on the person and the engagement, it could really impact how it is we follow up. So I think ABM plays and campaigns look much more like that at the engagement level. And then finally, the fourth stage, it's all about conversion. All right, how are we actually generating an opportunity out of this campaign? And again, that's more of a sales marketing partnership as opposed to marketing. Here's a lead, follow up on it. It kind of has to be done together.
Yeah. I love that you shared an actual example of, hey, just have a landing page, run targeted ads for personas at this company to that page and get engagement. What are some examples of maybe that conversion stage where you're work with more of a partnership with sales and marketing? What does that look like to say, hey, we got the contacts, we're getting engagement. How do we figure out how to actually open up an opportunity?
So this is where, the concept of a marketing qualified account, I think starts to become important. So especially when you actually, let's say you have a world where there's 2,000 accounts you could potentially go after in an ABM campaign, but you really only have budget to effectively go after 100. Like there's a whole qualification process in ABM, very similar to inbound lead qualification, where the more engagement an account has, the higher their intent is. So we talk about it as an intent level. So if there's an account and 5 people in that account are visiting our website, downloading our content, joining our webinars, that aggregates into an intent score that maybe at the 70 level, we flag that as an MQA, right? And that could be an account we tell sales, hey, marketing has done all this work to get this account doing a bunch of research on us, but they're not filling out the demo form because typically, B2B enterprise, we don't really fill out demo forms, right? So the inbound engine is not really doing a good job of capturing that lead there. So sales, I think you should launch a outbound campaign into this account, right? And that's where it's really not, and that's really where it's like a conversion partnership in sales of like, all right, marketing has lit up this account. There's a ton of intent. Now sales, how do we work together to actually convert that account? Now, I would say the partnership continues there because it's not just about dropping all of those contacts into an outreach sequence. What marketing can do is, all right, now we have an MQL. Hey, let's host a field event in the city of the HQ and start inviting all of these people in the MQA account to the event to possibly break into the account. We've done things like, well, actually, we haven't done this. I want to do something like, hey, this HQ, 80% of this company is in this one office building in Manhattan. Let's actually do an ad in their elevator because we know they're doing a bunch of research on our company. Let's do a really targeted ad of our company in that elevator.
Can you do that? You can buy. I never even thought about that.
So there's some, let's run a direct mail campaign, right? Like, one thing that happens in ABM is, if you're not an MQA or you're like a tier B or tier C account, you might get like the $10 direct mail package, which is a Starbucks card or like whatever it is we might send out, a plant or something. But if you're like an tier A account and you've MQA'd, we're gonna send you the $100 speaker or something, because like you've indicated enough interest in us that you're just looking for the excuse to talk to us. So how does marketing and sales work together to create an environment where it's like, oh yeah, wow, I just got a speaker. It's so funny. I was just researching, Ontra 2 weeks ago. Yeah, I'll definitely respond, right? Like that's kind of the serendipitous moment that we're trying to create in ABM. And I talk about it as serendipitous because to the prospect, it feels serendipitous, but to the marketer, we actually leverage data and orchestration to create that moment of serendipity.
Yeah, that's amazing and a little bit creepy as a consumer, but it's fascinating how you can make that work. The part I wonder about is I've been on the receiving end, right? I'll get an email from an account executive who says, "Hey, will you take a call with me? I'll send you some AirPods if you just take a call, no pressure, like no commitment needed." I take the call and just take the AirPods, which great for me, just spent 30 minutes for $150 earphones. But I'm curious, what's the positioning or framing that you use to make sure that one, whatever the offer is, that there's actually an ROI on it? Like, how do you make it like a clear value conversation and not just them being transactional?
Yeah. So I know you didn't ask about attribution, but what I just heard was an attribution question. So this is a B2B enterprise attribution strategy, right? Like if you're a growth leader, you're starting to run things like this and you have zero attribution strategy. How do you build an attribution system and model that I think it's two goals. You have two goals. One, that shows immediate value so people kind of get off your back, right? Like that's the first goal, and let you build what you need to build. And two, how do you kind of show long-term value and really get the data you need to really run your shop. So I think the first step when I'm building attribution models is I build a last touch attribution model, last touch before opportunity. So, what that means is, someone goes to a field event that marketing planned, and at that dinner, the salesperson opens up an opportunity. That whole opportunity gets marked as marketing in a last touch model, right? The reason why I like to start with last touch models is it's really easy to educate people why marketing created that opportunity. The CFO instantly gets it. The CEO is like, yeah, they got a speaker in the mail. The salesperson opened up an opportunity because of that speaker. Marketing gets credit for that opportunity, right? And so it becomes really easy to quickly show value in what marketing is doing, which gives you then the runway to not only build the marketing machine, but to actually set up a multi-touch model, which is kind of the end state, which in most cases takes at least a year or two in a high growth company to really build and fine tune. The next step is then I look at the first touch model, because what ends up happening is, in a last touch model, it typically skews towards demo requests, events, maybe direct mails, but really in my experience, what ends up happening is it looks like marketing is generating a bunch of leads through events and ads that just promote demo requests. If that's all you had, you would shut out all of your other channels, webinars, really focusing on building out a really robust website, content, all of these other things would suddenly get shut out because you're just focused on the last touch model. So the next thing I like to build out is the first touch model, which basically tells me, how did I get the lead? What's going to start lighting up there is content, webinars, these more top of the funnel plays that tell me how I'm getting the lead. And then once I have those two things, now I have the last touch model that gives me the runway I need to, that it's all about optics, unfortunately, that convinces the executive team and the CFO, I know what I'm doing and I'm contributing value to the business. Then I have the first touch model that starts to paint for me a fuller picture of all the various marketing channels that are contributing to my success. And then and along the way, you're building a multi-touch model, which typically starts linear, where all of your touches are getting equal credit, and then you can get into more specific thing. And when you get to a multi-touch model, now you really understand how all of your various channels, whether that's direct mail or content or whatever, is contributing to revenue. The other thing you've done is you've now had a year or two of educating the company of how to start caring about marketing metrics. And it's at this point, I would introduce the concept of pipeline influence. I think where a lot of folks go wrong when building marketing teams is they start introducing pipeline influence as a metric, and no one really believes them, because it's like, what do you mean you influenced it? It's like the person clicked 10 ads and then an outbound sales call is what generated the opportunity. If I, as a marketer, try to claim credit for that early on, people are going to be like, what do you mean? No, it was definitely David who did the outbound call that generated the opportunity. And they don't really believe that all the ad clicks leading up to that actually influenced the op. And so, that's kind of the process, I think.
Got it. Thanks for walking us through all of that. I'd love to hear it. So you shared a couple examples, seemed like hypothetical examples of ABM campaigns. I know there's a lot that goes into a campaign, but tell us about one of your favorite campaigns you've run, maybe one portion of it that was pretty exciting that worked out, that was very memorable for you.
So, so as I've been thinking about this, I've stopped calling it an ABM campaign because I think it confuses ABM with what I consider the super category of integrated campaign. And integrated campaign encompasses ABM, but it also does things like fuels the inbound engine, which, in a lot of businesses are still really important. So I tend to think of it as there's ABM tactics that might roll into an orchestration of multiple tactics and alignment with sales. And that's part of a broader integrated campaign, which includes what's your content plan, what's your high level theme, what's your inbound engine and ad strategy, right? And so that's kind of how I typically think of it, and how I actually build my orgs now. That could change 2 years from now, but that's kind of my current thinking. So in terms of your question, I think what you're really asking, what are some examples of ABM plays and orchestrations you could do? So I think, ABM tactics and some orchestrations you can do. I think in the tactics level, some of the most popular ones, direct mail, especially pre-COVID and now post-COVID, as people, if you're in an industry like financial services that are returning into the office, I think direct mail, I was at a prior company, I was generating $170 of pipeline for every dollar I put into my direct mail program. It was the number one channel. And we were selling into HR. Imagine I send a box of cupcakes which is $20, with shipping, to economic buyer or champion. They put it out in their office to share. All of a sudden, all the office is eating free cupcakes from, my company. And so now when the BDR goes and reaches out to that office, they're like, oh yeah, I heard about, blah, blah, blah. Tell me more. Right. So that's, one of the most classic, I would consider ABM tactics. That's why Sendoso has grown as quickly as they have grown, because that stuff kind of works. And I would say even in the COVID and post-COVID era, it is reemerging as a really effective channel to target an account and a group of people and to generate a lot of buzz to make the outbound outreach more successful. Then at the orchestration level, it's kind of like what I was sharing earlier, right? dedicated landing page. And as part of that landing page, there's a bunch of tactics. There's a direct mail offer. There's maybe an exclusive executive roundtable offer. There's all these things, and there's a tactic. There's an ad tactic where we're only serving ads to that target account using an ABM ad platform, and we're orchestrating all those things together with sales to open an opportunity in that account. So the orchestration I've done in the past starts with ads. Ads drive to a dedicated landing page where they start to capture engagement. Maybe 2 weeks later, we run a highly exclusive invite-only roundtable with the thought leader in the space, right? That everyone wants to hear from, only to the economic buyers or the champions of that account. So it's invite only. And then as a follow-up to that roundtable, we send out a really exclusive speaker to basically say, hey, David, thanks so much for joining our roundtable. Actually, what we actually do, sorry, I'll use a real example. We actually take the recording of that roundtable, create a bound booklet with quotes and like insights from the roundtable, and we mail it to the attendees and go, hey, David, here's a summary, it's a statement piece of everything you talked about. Your quote is in there, right? So it makes you feel special. And then the BDR comes and calls you up and says, hey, David, did you get the booklet we sent you? Wanted to see if you had any questions about it, right? That's like tactic after tactic after, like, now you as the buyer, you've seen the ads, you've seen the landing page, you've attended the roundtable, you have this really nice direct mail piece. So when the BDR goes after you, you're that much ready to respond and say, yeah, I'd love to talk to you.
Yeah, that is fast. So how do you get their address? Do they fill it out, or are you going to some database and like buying that information?
Pre-COVID, I was a real big fan of leveraging HQ addresses, especially you kind of knew pre-COVID, was this a HQ focus company? Was this hybrid? Was this remote? Like it was pretty clear, right? Like what those lines are. So it's a HQ focused company. You just send it to the HQ, and you use that to your advantage. Like maybe you're the one employee that's not in HQ and you're remote. But when I email you and say, hey, I sent you a package, did you get it? Even me responding and saying, oh, I actually don't work from the HQ, blah, blah, blah. Like that's a response I could take advantage of in a really productive way. It's like, oh, let me send you one to your house, right? I think the era of COVID has made that a lot more confusing. I definitely think in industries that are back in the office, the HQ approach could still work. There are technologies now that do address verification stemming from email. So you get an email, hey, David, would love, I see you're a Lakers fan. I don't know. I see you're a Lakers fan. I want to send you a jersey. If you fill out your address here, I'll send you a jersey and we should meet up. Right. Like, so that's a really common tactic. I think it's unfortunately a little less effective than the HQ tactic. But yeah, I mean, you're not going to get home addresses from someone unless they give it to you. So I think you're either sending it to the office, or which you can get through Zoom Info or whatever, or you're doing some kind of hybrid, like sending out the email first, letting them fill out their address. But I've noticed the response rates for a tactic like that is typically less successful.
Got it. Makes sense. Yeah, I recently found a service called ongoody.com. And their whole thing is, if you want to send a gift to someone, just give us their email. We'll like email them to say, hey, David would like to send you a gift, Joe. Like, what's your mailing address? And we'll send it to you, which I found to be very helpful. I don't know if tools like Sendoso allow that, but that's been a helpful thing for sending out gifts. Let's shift away from the ABM specific questions. And I know one of the things that you're quite passionate about is like leadership and building a team. So let's say you join a company and you got to build a demand gen team from scratch, or in your case, let's call it a growth marketing team. How do you think about that? What's the framework you're thinking about to figure out who do you hire first, and in what order are you building out your team?
Yeah, I think the first question I need to ask is, like it actually starts with company goals and resourcing, right? So for the first step is aligning with CEO, CFO, depending on how big the organization is, what are the company goals for the next year? And then it's asking the question, what are your expectations for marketing support of these goals? And this is, okay, you just asked about demand gen. So let's just focus on demand gen. What are the revenue goals for next year? What is our expectation for how marketing will contribute to that? Going back to my earlier point, using a last touch model. And there's certain benchmarks for this, right? So for B2B enterprise, typically it's a lower contribution metric. So in terms of like a true marketing contribution, in the biggest companies, it's somewhere at like 20% probably. I think at a higher growth startup, like marketing can effectively contribute anywhere from 30 to 40% of overall pipeline and revenue to a company. And so it's really aligning on that. And then it's building out the model. All right, if I'm supposed to contribute, let's say 33%, a third of the revenue next year, how do I do that? Right? Like, how much is going to come from digital? How much is going to come from events? How much is going to come from these ABM, tactics and orchestrations we're working on, building a model for that. And then basically then saying, all right, how much money and people do I need to actually execute all this, right? I would say that level of planning, or at least some thought into all that, because the reality is if you're early stage, you don't have a lot of the historical metrics or even time or data to do all that modeling. But that level of thinking first is going to help you do a few things. One, it's going to help you go to the CFO and say, hey, I can absolutely contribute 33% of the pipeline, but I need this kind of budget and headcount. And they're going to basically come and say, cool, let's do it. Or no, like that would make marketing budget 40% of our revenue. And there's no way which is very typical and probably sub $10 million, right? Like there's no way we can spend 40% of our revenue on marketing. And then he comes back, or he or she comes back and says, this is what I can give you. And then you can put that into a model and say, all right, well, with these kind of resources at best, I'm going to sign up for 15%. Right. So it gives you some planning to try to set you up for success up front. A lot of it is honestly throwing spaghetti at the wall and guessing, but at least you've had that conversation and that opportunity to try to set you up for success as possible. Then it's really, all right, I have 3 heads. What do I need? Versus I have 10 heads. What do I need? If you have like 1 or 2 or 3 heads, you're basically looking for senior generalists who can come in, figure things out, who's seen the script before and can wear multiple hats. If you have 10 heads, you can start to specialize the team. And this kind of builds on a lot of the stuff I was talking about earlier. When I think about specializing a team, it's kind of, this is now my 5th demand gen focused role. I have a campaigns person who's thinking about the inbound engine and ABM. I have an events leader who's thinking about sponsored events and field. I have if content, if top of the funnel organic is important, I think it makes a lot of sense for content to sit in growth or demand. In some orgs, if you've run BDR outbound machines before, like that can often sit in, but I'm basically thinking about leadership roles in terms of what are like the main demand funnels I expect pipeline to come on, and I'm hiring specialists to run those functions.
Yeah, and you mentioned essentially leadership roles just now. How does that change? Like once you mentioned you're hiring a bunch of directors. How do you think about building out that leadership team? So you mentioned these first senior generalists that you hired. Do they essentially get promoted up into a director role, or is that only sometimes the case?
I think it really depends on expectations and budget, right? Like if you're at an early stage startup and you have a $1 million program budget and 2 head counts, but $400,000 to spend on 2 heads. The reality is you're gonna get 2 mid-level managers. Like basically, I would optimize for as high of levels as possible, right? So rather than hiring 4 coordinators, I'd probably hire 2 mid-level managers, one focused on building the inbound engine, one focused on building, the outbound engine with sales, and, expect that I'm going to be spending a lot of time coaching and driving strategy. And in an org like that, as you grow, they're going to get promoted up into more specialist roles. In a larger org, where I'm already like here at Ontra, I have, the privilege of being able to build out a specialized org from the get-go. I'm looking for really senior specialists who've seen the script before, who know more about these channels than I do, who can really come in and quickly take it to the next level. Right.
Got it. So let's say someone's listening to this and they're like, hey, I'm tired of my job. I want to work for Joe. He sounds really smart. What advice would you have for them, or what would make their application or resume stand out? Like, what are you looking for when you hire someone?
Yeah. As someone coming into tech with a really weird background, I spent a lot of time working on how I tell my story and how I how I market myself on my resume. So I really like my resume template. Like I think it's pretty good, and I've gotten a lot of good feedback on it. And so I tend to look for similar things. And I'll just walk through what my resume looks like. I have a statement up top of who I am. And I think mine says now I'm a, growth marketing leader who specializes in X. It's like one line. And then the next thing I put is all the things I specialize in. So it's like ABM, email marketing, paid advertising, campaigns, and it's maybe like about 15 items, I think, up top of my specialty. And then I just list my experience, and I keep it one page. And the reason I recommend a resume format is it basically follows my principles for resume design, interviewing. It's 1, control your narrative. If you don't control your narrative, you're letting the other person control your narrative. That's why I say I'm a B2B growth marketer who's specializing in these things. If I don't have that, they might read my resume and go, oh yeah, like Joe's a blah, blah, blah. And it could be totally off. And I just want to control my narrative. The other thing is I want to highlight what I can do and the metrics associated with it. So I highlight my particular skill set, again, controlling the narrative. And then in my individual bullet points, they're all metrics driven, right? So I always make sure, there's a quantifiable thing in whatever it is I'm talking about in my resume. I think if you've successfully done that those same principles come then in the interview process. First question you're always going to get asked is, so tell me about yourself. Give me your elevator pitch. That's controlling your narrative, right? Like when I try to get into tech, I literally wrote that out word for word, and I practiced it in the shower for a month. So I could literally read, because that's 95% of the interviews you're going to get. That's the first question. Tell me your story. And if I think most people think that's a throwaway question. I would say that's the most important question of your interview, that you should be able to tell in a succinct fashion, and it's going to set up the rest of your interview, for success. Just like your resume, that top part. And then the third key, just like your resume, make sure you give concrete examples with metrics, right? And a good demand gen leader is going to ask you for metrics. So rather than just give your example and let them ask you, just tie your metrics in, because it communicates to the person, this guy's obsessed with metrics, which is pretty key.
Yeah, I love that. So for anyone listening to this, if they apply and get an interview, they should expect that question. Prepare now.
Yep.
All right. So
a lot of open roles. Please apply.
Awesome. We'll make sure to link to the job listings. So we're going to close out with a couple of my favorite questions here at the end. So what's one opinion or belief you have about business or marketing that you think people would disagree with?
The top one comes to mind is, and this is going to sound really self-serving, but I'll unpack it a little. But I think marketing is not a support function of sales, but it's the sharp end of the spear, and if not more important than sales, definitely on par and should be held.
Hot take.
Yes. And I say that, like, I've thought a lot about this, because when you study marketing in business school, a lot of times sales is a function of marketing, right? Because another anecdotal thing. I'm rereading the book Crossing the Chasm, and the thing I didn't pick up the first time of reading that book, it's a book about marketing, because in old school business, the marketer, the CMO, was their domain. Their domain was the market. Like, they were the market expert. And so, and what's happened is, as companies have developed, we started to strip a lot of things off of the marketer's responsibility. So, for example, the marketer used to be the voice of the customer. Well, who's the voice of the customer now in a B2B org? It's this new role called the Chief Customer Officer, or the SVP of Customer Success. Those kind of roles didn't really exist before, right? The marketer used to be the industry specialist. Well, in a lot of orgs I've observed, that's kind of become a sales role, right? Like, because, like, the sellers are the ones out in the industry, and the marketer used to always own pricing and packaging, and that's now kind of been stripped off, and is now, like, a lot of times in the product role. So what's happened is the marketer role in the C-suite, I think, has actually become neutered a little bit, and so you have all these statistics, like, the marketer has the shortest tenure of the organization. They're often the lowest paid C-level executive, and all of these things. And I actually think, one, if we keep going down this road, you're gonna miss this golden opportunity to build, like, lasting brands, which is ultimately what you need a great marketer to do. And so, I'm really passionate. Like, C-suites evolve, businesses evolve. We need to think about, what does the next generation of CMO look like, where they really have a true equal seat at the table, and they're not really seen as, like, the lowest ranking executive, in the C-level. And a lot of I think the thought leader CMOs out there are doing so. I think of Latney from Sixth Sense. So she has she's not the chief marketing officer, she's the chief market officer, right? And it's this reaffirmation. I don't just manage a bunch of actions, marketing tactics.
Yeah,
I'm the owner of the market, right? And she's re-exerting herself. I think I've really been thinking about this concept of CMO 3.0. If a CMO 1.0 was like the Don Draper creative guy, and CMO 2.0 was like the demand gen leads and MQLs and pipeline guy, I think CMO 3.0 is this is the person who really cares about revenue, and it's the revenue focused CMO, and you might think, oh, well, isn't that the CRO who's typically a salesperson? And I'm like, well, yeah, but revenue is much more than just sales. It's also being able to understand what's the total addressable market, and how do we grow the total addressable market, and what's the revenue potential of our business and our company. And I think the marketer uniquely is qualified to own that piece of it, the chief market officer, if you will. And really, I think once the marketer starts to pick that up again, I believe you're going to see more and more CROs come from the marketing department as well as the sales department.
Yeah, it's I did not know or pay attention to a lot of these different dynamics that you pointed out, but it reminds me of how, marketing feels like one of those functions where everyone thinks they know what you should do, but you talk about sales and all of a sudden people don't really have an opinion. You talk about ops and people don't really have an opinion, but marketing, everyone always has an opinion on what would be done, like how the numbers would be much better if they just did their idea. So it's fascinating seeing that trend. And it sounds like the next stage is going to be really interesting to watch how CMOs develop. So really, really interesting take there. All right. So next question here is, what's one impactful piece of advice you've been given?
the first thing that comes to mind is not like a specific piece of advice, but it's something I've been thinking about a lot, and actually goes counter to some advice I'm getting as I grow senior. So let me actually speak the counterpoint of the advice, which is, a lot of people tell me that the more senior I get, the more I need to basically be able to reduce my empathy and make the hard calls. And to a degree, I agree with that, right? Like, there's always going to be people I need to fire. There's always going to be people I need to performance manage out. There's always going to be hard calls I'm going to need to make when, revenue is down and blah, 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 blah. But I fundamentally disagree, I think, at this point in my, career, and especially watching what's happening right now in the job market, with this idea that a key quality of senior leadership is making, metrics driven hard calls. I actually think the key quality of a great leader is, how do you make the hard calls, but really hold in tension the people that hard call impacts, right? And so I want to start off by saying I fully believe that at times, there are times in any company life cycle where you need to do mass layoffs. That's just a part of business, and it's unavoidable. Even this debate around rescinding offers and is that morally right or correct? Like, dude, there are absolutely times where, for the sake of the business, and for the greater good, you have to make some of those hard calls. But if you're not struggling with that, and not just emotionally, but tactically, like, are there other options here? Can we explore pay cuts on the executive team? Can we explore other places to cut? Can we, can we explore better ways of doing communication, even if there's a security risk involved? Like if you haven't spent hours and hours and hours in that tension, I think you're missing something as a leader, right? And I've seen this enough now where it's just like, well, revenue just dropped 50%. We need to cut 20%. It's pretty cut and dry. If you're a good leader, you're just going to execute. I just don't think that's true anymore. And I think now you're seeing a revolt in the workforce against that kind of thinking. And I think the leaders who are going to be the most successful are not just the ones who are like in tears as they announce layoffs, but the ones who can really transparently say, here's the full process we went through. And for people to walk away feeling, yeah, that sucked, but I get it. Like, I think that's going to be that's a really, like, how interesting would it be for some of these mass layoffs that happen, where if there was enough transparency about the process and just the tension, where most people walked away and go like, man, it really sucks I lost a job. I'm kind of angry, but yeah, they actually really tried and they explained it in a way that I make like that would be phenomenal. And I think that's what we should aspire to as leaders. So
I actually got chills listening to you say that, because I don't think I personally have not seen that before. But if a leader could communicate, we tried this, we considered this option, we considered this option, that didn't work, we considered these last options, like this was the final, like, last resort, and we really tried. And we, in the beginning, we wanted to cut this many jobs, but now we're able to reduce that to cutting this many. I think that process would be fascinating, one to observe from an outsider's perspective, but I imagine that feels a lot better for employees than just, getting cut.
Yep.
That's great. All right. So last question here, wrap it up. Where can people find you on the internet?
Yeah, David, you and I talked a lot about, I need to build my personal brand more. I'm terrible at it. So probably the best place would be on LinkedIn. Would love for you to, I have a rule. I never connect with anyone who doesn't leave a message or that I don't know. But if you tell me you heard me on the podcast and you want to do X, you want to ask these questions or whatever, I'll definitely connect with you on LinkedIn. Would love for a follow on Ontra or a job application or a resume from you if you're interested in connecting. But yeah, I think LinkedIn is probably the best place.
Awesome. We'll make sure to link to all of those pages. All right, Joe. Thanks so much for the time. Really enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah, thank you. This was a lot of fun.